Good morning. Today's scripture reading, first part comes from Genesis 2, 1 through 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done and rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. Second part of the scripture comes from Matthew 12, 1 through 8. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." He answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not unlawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read the law that the priests on the Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words meant, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. All right, so we have made it to the final day of the 7 days in the opening creation poem that we find in the book of Genesis. And of course, we come to the seventh day, and of course, on the seventh day, God rests. And I think this is an interesting. There's a lot of interesting things. The Bible's just interesting. Let's just go with that. I guess I just we'll just take that as a given. But this is one of those passages that we get to like, okay, this makes sense. God did a bunch of hard work, and God decided to rest. I do think sometimes that we don't quite understand what the Bible is actually saying there about this idea of rest and what the purpose of this rest is. I mean, after all, yes, I'm sure making planets and stars and moons and all that is heavy work, but we are talking about God here. So I'm not sure that God had to go home and put a cold compress on, or anything like that. I'm not sure that's really what the image we should be taking from this. But I think what we really see here is the culmination of what God's been doing all along. If you look in the other 6 days of creation, there's certain things that are repeated, and one of the things that repeated, of course, is the idea of God looked, he observed at what he was doing, and God proclaimed it good, right? So this idea that God saw it and it was good. So as time goes on, as the days go on, God is looking and seeing the work that he's doing, and it's good. And so we get to the last day, the day that God rests. And in many ways, what we see is God taking all of this stuff that he did, all this good stuff that he made, and taking a day to actually enjoy, in some way, this stuff, this amazing creation that God made. And it says here in Genesis that he hallowed it and called it sacred. If you kind of skip ahead to the book of Exodus, you'll remember there's this guy in the book of Exodus. His name is Moses. No, he doesn't look like Charlton Heston, but still, at one point in that story, Moses goes up on a mountain, gets a bunch of rules from God, and brings them back down. And one of the rules one of the big 10 rules is to honor the Sabbath, right, and keep it holy. So take every day out of every week, take one day as a day of rest. Now, there's a lot of things that we take for granted because they've always been that way. One of the things that we take for granted because it's always been that way is this idea that weeks have 7 days. But if you think about it, there's no reason for that, right? There's no reason that a week should have 7 days or 6 days or 5 days or 12 days or whatever. So if you wonder why weeks have 7 days, it's from here. It's from this passage. It's from this idea of God creating and then, of course, on the last day taking a day of rest. As kind of a mark of the end of one time and the beginning of another. So if you ever wondered that, just a real random trivia for you. Apparently, I wonder weird things sometimes. But why does a week have 7 days? Well, here you go. That's why. Now, at the time, especially in before Jesus' time and in the time when Judaism was from post Moses on, the idea of taking an entire day of rest was actually a pretty strange concept. Now, again, we live in a time where we have things like weekends, right? Like we expect to work, for 5 days, and we expect to get a couple of days off. Like that's generally the world that most of us live in, unless, of course, you work for the church and then you work on Sundays, but that's okay. You got to take your days off other places. But, we live in this world where that is the expectation. Especially in Moses' time, David's time, and really even up into Jesus' time, this idea that you should take an entire day off where you don't do work was a very actually foreign concept and really wasn't widely practiced outside of Judaism. It's one of the things that made the Israelites different than everybody else. And you will find writings of the day that are not very particularly flattering to Jews at the time. Some of them even going so far as like to calling them lazy for taking this day off, because obviously the grain still needs to be picked and the animals still needed to be tended to, and this idea of taking regular time off was actually a very foreign concept to most of the world. But it is one of those things that made one of the things that distinguished Jews from other people of the time. Now, the Ten Commandments is pretty basic. It just basically says, you shall honor the Sabbath. Well, what does that mean, right? Like, well, what does that mean? What can you do and what can't you do? And so the second you say you should do, this, then you're going to start getting questions, right? Like, well, what about this? Or can I do this on the Sabbath? Can I do that on the Sabbath? And so what we have is over these intervening years, from Moses' time to Jesus' time, over those several centuries, they're basically built up a set of kind of like regulations, if you will, about how you are supposed to honor the Sabbath. And basically situations and scenarios would come up, and the religious leaders would make a determination of, is that work, is that not work? And this is a process that actually still for observant Jews goes on today. It still continues to happen today because we keep inventing new things, right? Like, can you drive a car on the Sabbath? Can you ride in an elevator on the Sabbath? Like all these sorts of questions keep coming up. So there continues to be this buildup of kind of traditions and regulations about what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. And this was definitely true in Jesus' day. And there were literally like hundreds of these rules. And one of the things that you would do as a religious leader is you would know these rules. That's actually, in fact, where a lot of your power as a religious leader is. If Sadducee, Pharisee, scribe, teacher of the law, all these different people we meet in the scripture that Jesus likes to debate with. We'll put that nicely. We'll say debate. But that's one of the ways that one of the things you were expected to learn and know is all these various rules for all these various scenarios. So what we have in today's passage is we have Jesus's disciples running afoul of one of these rules, and it basically says you can't pick grain on the Sabbath because picking grain is work, and so you're not supposed to do that. So that's where they got in trouble. There is nothing actually in the Bible that says you can't pick grain on the Sabbath. It just says honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. But there's all these other rules that were built up over time because of these various scenarios that people come up with that people were expected to follow about how you go about keeping it holy. Now, we are not immune to this, by the way. We still do this today. Maybe not around the Sabbath, but we still do this, and you do not need to look any further for proof of this than the game of golf, which it's hard for me to be fair about because I don't particularly like the game of golf, but it means I can make fun of it. So the official rule book for the game of golf is something like 600 pages long. And it has rules for pretty much everything. And there's a couple of them that I found pretty interesting. No, I did not read all 600 pages of the book. That's what we have Google for. But there's a couple of kind of interesting rules that are actually in the official rule book to the game of golf. And one relates to air. So if a wind gust blows your ball, there's no penalty for that. That's okay. But if at what it terms artificially propelled air moves your ball, then that's a penalty. So basically, if the wind comes and blows your ball, that's fine. But like low-flying helicopter, I guess, I'm trying to figure out where even like where artificially propelled air would come from. But a low-flying helicopter, that moves your ball, yeah, you're in trouble. There actually is a rule that says if your ball gets embedded in an orange, I'm not making this up, like the fruit, right? If your ball gets embedded in an orange, you cannot extract the ball from the orange without taking a penalty. That's a penalty shot. If you're playing near cactus, and your ball rests up against a cactus, you can use a towel to protect your arm and your leg, but you cannot wrap a towel around the cactus. You have to leave the cactus alone. There's rules about this is one of my favorites. There's rules about flying insects. If a flying insect lands on your ball, you cannot move that insect, right? You can't like pick it up and move it off your ball. However, they give you an out on this one. This is literally from the rules. However, as an insect is animate and capable of moving on its own, the player may take actions such as waving his hand, club, or towel to encourage the insect to move. So you can't move it, but you can encourage it to move on its own. And then finally, one more, just because I think they're fun. If you are going to swing at the ball and the club head comes apart, if you lose the head of your club while you're swinging, if you lose it as you're raising the club, it's backwards from what I think it is. Yes, if you lose it on your backswing and then complete the stroke, it doesn't count as a penalty. But if you lose it on the downswing and complete the stroke, then it does count as a shot. I don't know why. Somebody decided these things. And so I'm making a little bit of light here. But it's sort of like, so it's like that, right? Scenarios come up and then you have to decide how you're going to address them. Well, in Jesus' day, how we're going to handle the Sabbath and what that looks like, they kept coming up with stuff. And again, they continue to do this today. In fact, there's a neighborhood you'll find in New York. You'll find this neighborhood in New York where if you look up, there is this wire. There's this wire that's strung around a bunch of buildings. I think we got a picture of it. Yep. It's a wire strung around a bunch of buildings that basically marks a neighborhood, and the purpose of that wire is to basically extend the indoors, and that wire marks the area that these particularly Orthodox Jews are allowed to go in on the Sabbath. So basically this is an area in which you're allowed to carry things. And you're allowed to basically do things like push a stroller. So even on the Sabbath, you can still take your kid out for a walk as long as you're within this wire. And one of the things that they do, one of the things that the rabbis do in this community is they maintain that wire. Now, bring us up because obviously, in Jesus' day, the idea of Sabbath was a serious business, right? It was something that was taken very, very seriously, not only by Pharisees and Sadducees, but by everybody. There was this real concern about wanting to follow God's commands and wanting to follow this idea of honoring the Sabbath. Now, I think today, where we don't have, this strict set of rules about what we can do and can't do on the Sabbath. It used to be that stores were closed on Sunday, and of course now they're not. And restaurants used to be closed, and of course now they're not. And they schedule soccer games on Sunday mornings, which drives me a little bit crazy. That's okay. We live in a different time and place now, and in some ways, one of the things that Christianity did, early Christians did, is look at passages like the one that Jesus, the one we have of Jesus here, take his disciples taking the grain on the Sabbath, and the one thing they did is they got rid of a lot of those rules. And just kind of made it a little bit more generic. Now, I personally think that's a good thing. I don't really want, as a religious leader, to have to memorize 600 different rules about whether or not you're allowed to carry groceries home on the Sabbath or not. But I think we have to, though, recognize that there still is this command, there still is this intention, and we are still, God. It's still God's desire for us to honor the Sabbath. It's still God's desire for us to rest, right? And for us to follow in the example of God at creation, in the example of Jesus, and take that intentional time and to allow ourselves to have that time. And if I can guess that many of you out there are probably like me, and we can sometimes find it hard. I can sometimes find it hard to give myself permission to do the things that are not productive and are not work and are not, I'm not doing to, for those reasons, but to really give myself time and permission to do the things that I just simply enjoy doing. And now, if you know me at all, or if you're for friends on Facebook, you know that one of my favorite things to do is to go driving. And we definitely live in a part of the world where we are blessed to have many a fun little mountain road. And so a couple of years ago, my lovely, amazing wife, bought me a car that was basically has no purpose other than to enjoy little mountain roads. And it's something that I love, and it's something to enjoy. And the nice thing about a lot of these little mountain roads that we have around here is your cell phone doesn't work once you get into those places, which is amazing. And the car only has 2 seats, so I can't take everybody with me even if I wanted to. Good times. And I really do. I do enjoy it. It's something that I do, and it's one of the few things I will actually allow myself to make time for. Yes, you can drive it in the winter with the top down. That's how you know real convertible drivers. Anyway, so shortly after I got it, though, however, I had to go to a clergy meeting, and the clergy meeting was up in Estes Park. And of course, the road, the many ways to get from where the church is and where I live to Estes Park, there are a good road to go up there. So I'm like, great, I only have to go for a few days. I'm going to pack everything in my car, and I'm going to take it up there, and we're going to have a good time. So drove it up there. I was having a great time at this meeting with some of my clergy friends. And we were, driving around town and all that kind of stuff with the top down like you do. And, you run into people. You run into people and people say hi. I will tell you, never. It was the reaction to me in that car was very interesting, and I won't name names, but many of my peers elected to take it upon themselves to, one, speculate if I was having my midlife crisis early, loudly and to me. Got a couple of eye rolls. In fact, on the whole, while most people were okay, there was a solid handful of people who did not hide their, not dislike, disgust, I don't know what it was, but it definitely didn't make me feel good, right? It didn't make me feel, and nor was it intended to make me feel good. And I do think sometimes, while sometimes we struggle to give ourselves permission to take the time we need, one of the reasons we struggle with that is sometimes we don't do a very good job of giving other people permission and celebrate what other people do when they choose to take the time for themselves, when they choose to live, to take the rest, to take those things that will bring them joy, and for no reason other than bringing joy. And today we actually have a term. We call this self-care. Right? And it's all about self-care now. And I can actually feel many of your eyes rolling out there right now because maybe you work for an employer or, it's very, chic on Facebook to talk about self-care. That's the big deal. Self-care. And if we're not careful, the problem with self-care and this idea of self-care is it becomes something else to do. Right? It just becomes something else to add to the endless to-do list. And now I have something else to feel bad about, right? Because now I already feel bad that I'm not doing all the work I feel like I should be doing. I already feel bad about these other things that are going on in my life, so I'm not sure. Now I have to feel bad about the fact that I'm not doing enough self-care. And somehow now this is my job. And I think that a lot of that stems from the fact that we don't really understand or we don't really get what it is that self-care is about. I think, what God set the Sabbath to be was really setting aside a day for self-care in the truest sense, right? Now, for some of you, self-care may be, going to play a round of golf. Not my thing, but that's fine. Whatever that is. But I think sometimes we build it up as this expectation. This is something else we're supposed to do. And because somebody else's self-care looks like this, then mine must look like that too, even though I really don't enjoy yoga, and I don't. But my wife does, and that's cool. But we get this kind of built up in our head. So I think, in some ways it's important to recognize what actual self-care is and what it is not. Now, self-care isn't about just pampering yourself, right? It's not about, it might be bubble baths, again, not my thing. It might be thing, but I think we actually have a good example of self-care, of what self-care is in today's story, right? Why did the disciples take the grain? Because they were hungry. Right? Because they had a need that needed to be met. Sometimes self-care is recognizing that we have a need, that there's something. It may be something as simple as being hungry. It may be, giving ourselves permission to buy new shoes when our shoes are wore out. Could be anything like that. But recognizing that we have a need and that we are allowed, yes, to take action to meet that need, right? And so that's the disciples really are practicing self-care in this moment. Sure, it may go against the rules to pick the grain, but what are they supposed to do? Are they just supposed to go hungry all day? Should they care for that need they have for themselves? So sometimes it's about even just stepping back, and why we need this time of rest and reflection to even recognize sometimes we don't even know what our needs are, right? Sometimes we don't even know what we need. Right? And we won't know until we actually take a minute to stop and rest and reflect and go, oh, I'm not mad, I'm hungry, right? Hangry is a real thing. We experience it in my house often. So recognize, but don't, take, so self-care isn't necessarily about pampering yourself or anything like that, but it is about recognizing that we, as people, we do have needs that need to be met, and we should give ourselves permission to do that. Self-care is not about putting yourself above others or ahead of others. Sometimes we don't practice self-care because we feel it's selfish, right? Like we shouldn't do these things. Now, what we don't recognize is if we make a habit out of not taking care of ourselves, then our ability to care for others is really, really undermined, right? So in many ways, taking care of ourselves is about caring for other people because it leaves us in a place and strength and position to do that. But I found this great quote online. It says, if the way you do self-care frequently ends up inconveniencing or dictating to others, it's time to rethink that. And I would agree. It's not about saying everyone's got to bend to my will now and everyone's got to do things the way that I want to do them, right? No, that's not self-care. But it is about recognizing by taking care of ourselves, we give ourselves the opportunity to care for others. In many ways, self-care is contextual, as we've already talked about. So it's the thing. It truly is. You are allowed. You have permission. I give it to you. To practice self-care as you see best fit for you, because everyone's passions, everyone's desires, what brings people joy is going to be different. So the question isn't, am I doing it right or am I doing it wrong? The question is, am I doing something? Am I engaging in something that really is allowing me to rest? Is it really allowing me to refill myself? Is it really bringing joy into my life? If it is, then it's probably okay, so long as it's legal. Don't do anything illegal. Looking at you, Kimberly. All right. And oftentimes, it's really self-care really is more about our state of mind than anything else. It's more about how we think about what we're doing. It's more about how we think about what's going on. It's more about the state of mind we are in than oftentimes the activity, right? You can, again, me practicing yoga would not be self-care because I cannot get, that's not a frame of mind I find myself getting into. For some of you, it may be, because it does allow you to get into a certain state of mind. So oftentimes it's more how we think about things. Sometimes being in my kitchen is self-care because it's fun and I enjoy it and it brings me joy. Sometimes I just need to feed my family and we're all a little bit hungry, right? So it's oftentimes about that. And then finally, oftentimes, self-care is social. And I think this is part of the struggle right now. And I think this is one of the things that many of us are struggling with right now, and why many of us are struggling with this whole idea is oftentimes, I think, before COVID and everything we've been going through now, I think the false assumption was that self-care was about solitary activities. And I think now we're all learning and definitely appreciating how important it is to be around other people. And again, we see this in Jesus' life. Jesus is almost never alone, right? If you go through the Gospels, he's almost never alone. He's with his disciples constantly. He's got these 12, guys around him. He's got this other group of people around him. He's got the 3 he usually hangs out with. Even when he goes up on the mountain and sees, Moses and Elijah and God in all their splendor, he still takes his friends with him, right? We are social creatures, right? We are designed to be together. And I think one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is a lot of us are missing that social component of it. And I do hope, if nothing else good, though I think much will, if nothing else good comes out of this past year, is I hope we learn not to take that so much for granted and appreciate the people that we are able to be around. And when we can be around more people, really appreciate the value and importance of that. So this whole series, we have been talking about what it is to create a life. And one of the things that we take from this story, the first poem of the book of Genesis, is this idea that God creates. And God created things that are able to create, that is us. And that one thing that we take from this is God does it all very intentionally. There are no accidents in Genesis chapter 1. And there are no accidents in Jesus' life. Jesus does what he does, and he does it very intentionally. And I think at the end of the day, that if we take nothing from our last time together, what I hope you take is this, is that we are called, we are able, we have been given the gift and the opportunity to shape our lives. Now, there are certainly things that are outside of our control. Absolutely, that is true. There are certainly things that we couldn't change even if we wanted to, and frankly, cable news and Facebook and all those sorts of things are full of things full of stuff that you can't change, right? And usually they're trying to get you mad about something you can't change. So there certainly are things that are outside of our control. That said, there are things that are in our control. We do get to choose how we spend our time. We get to choose who we spend it with. We get to choose, to some degree, the state of mind that we are in and how we choose to see and reflect and observe and experience things. That's how we create a life. That's how we do it intentionally. That's how we live the life that God has called us to, because we've all been given this great ability, the ability to create, the ability to shape our world around us, and if nothing else, to choose to consider how we see and choose to reflect on how things around us. God rested on the seventh day. God chose to rest. God chose to rest and observe his good creation. God chose to rest and enjoy the fruits of his labor. And then God said to those things he created, those things made in his image, God said to his children, you do the same. Make time. Make time for these things. Make time for the things that bring you joy. Make time to reflect on the week, on your life. Make time to see and experience all that God has given to you. That is how we rest, and that is how we honor the Sabbath. Amen.